मानुषी संवाद में आप सभी मित्रों का स्वागत, नमस्कार। वेलकम टू दिस एडिशन ऑफ मानुषी संवाद। आज मुझे लगता है किसी का मन भी और कहीं नहीं जा रहा, इसलिए हमने शॉर्ट नोटिस पे अपने मेहमान संजय दीक्षित जी को कहा कि जो हमने ओरिजिनल टॉपिक चुना था उसको आज छोड़ देते हैं और बात करते हैं रशिया यूक्रेन वॉर की, क्योंकि जंग वाकई छिड़ गई। बहुत से लोग, संजय भाई, सोचते थे कि नहीं, ये सिर्फ धमकियां दी जा रही हैं, वॉर थोड़े करेंगे, और कुछ लोग तैयार हो रहे हैं थर्ड वर्ल्ड वॉर के लिए भी। तो दोनों एक्सट्रीम ओपिनियंस, और आज जंग तो अच्छी खासी सेकेंड डे आप कह सकते हैं जंग का है। एंड इट स्पीक्स वॉल्यूम्स फॉर योर deep expertise on such a range of issues that with 45 minutes notice you agreed to a different topic। और आपका एक
थैंक
छोटा
यू।
सा सेंटेंस था, मैं तो एक्सटेम्पोर ही बोलता हूँ, तो किसी पे भी बुलवा लो। दैट स्पीक्स वॉल्यूम्स एंड प्लेजर टू हैव यू ऑन मानुषी संवाद। तो
नमस्ते आपको, नमस्ते आपके सभी दर्शकों को नमस्कार
जी, तो मैं without much ado, I'm going to ask my first basic question। ये जो रशिया यूक्रेन वॉर है, इसके हिंदुस्तान के लिए क्या इम्प्लीकेशंस है, और आपके नजर में क्या हिंदुस्तान की सरकार सही स्टैंड ले रही है?
इसका सेकंड पार्ट मैं पहले लेता हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि भारत की सरकार बिल्कुल सही स्टैंड ले रही है। कुछ लोग कहते हैं कि नॉन अलाइनमेंट का ज़माना चला गया। ये नॉन अलाइनमेंट नहीं है, रियल पॉलिटिक है। और रियल पॉलिटिक ये है कि हमें अपने देश के जो इंटरेस्ट हैं, जो हमारे देश के सरोकार हैं, हमें उनकी चिंता सर्वप्रथम करनी है और हमें किसी तरह के आइडियोलॉजिकल नैरेटिव में नहीं फंसना है। और वो ये है कि हमारे संबंध दोनों से ही हैं। रूस से भी बहुत अच्छे संबंध रहे हैं। रूस जो है रणनीतिक रूप से भारत की उसने पहले भी बहुत सहायता की है और अभी भी, जहाँ तक आपके रणनीतिक क्षेत्र की यदि ना भी कहें तो जो मिलिट्री हार्डवेयर का जो क्षेत्र है उसमें हम रूस से बहुत नज़दीकी से, बहुत ही निकटता से मिले हुए। S-400 जैसे सिस्टम्स हम उनसे ले रहे हैं काटसा के बावजूद। जो अमेरिका ने जो काटसा लॉ लगा रखा है उसके बावजूद जो है वो हमने उसकी परवाह नहीं करते हुए उसका, और पहली बैटरी जो है वो आके डिप्लॉय भी हो चुकी है। तो भारत के लिए इम्प्लीकेशंस की बात जब करेंगे तो अब सबसे बड़े इम्प्लीकेशंस यही आएंगे कि ये जो हमारे जो डिफेंस आर्किटेक्चर है हमारा, और जो हमारे जो डिफेंस रिलेशनशिप जो रशिया से है, उसका क्या होगा। एक चीज़, क्योंकि उसमें निश्चित रूप से पेमेंट की समस्या आएंगी। जैसे आपको ध्यान है, एक बार ईरान के साथ जब सैंक्शंस लगी थी तो ईरान के साथ पेमेंट्स की बहुत समस्याएं थी, उसके कई अलग अलग रास्ते निकाले गए थे। और इस तरह से रशिया के साथ भी समस्या है कि डॉलर ट्रेड में समस्या आ सकती है। हालांकि उनके साथ तो हमारा रूबल ट्रेड का पुराना अनुभव रहा हुआ है, तो क्या हम दोबारा रूबल ट्रेड में जाएंगे। लेकिन वो रूबल ट्रेड जो हुआ करती थी, उसके जो पेग जो रूबल का कर रखा था रशिया ने, वो हमारे लिए नितांत अनफेवरेबल था। लेकिन उस समय रशिया सुपर पावर थी और हम छोटी पावर थे। अब रशिया सुपर पावर तो है नहीं और इकोनॉमी में तो हमसे बहुत पीछे है। तो अब ये सब जो चीज़ें हैं ये आगे जैसे चलेगा वैसे वो देखा जाएगा। लेकिन एक चीज़ मुझे ज़रूर जिसे कहते हैं कि सहारा देती है, वो ये देती है कि मैंने देखा कि यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स के प्रेशर के उपरांत भी यूरोप ने अभी तक जो स्विफ्ट सिस्टम है उसको निलंबित करने से मना कर रखा है, और उन्होंने नहीं किया है। क्योंकि यूरोप के भी जो आर्थिक हित हैं वो रूस से जुड़े हुए हैं और बहुत ही निकटता के साथ जुड़े हुए हैं। और विशेषकर जो ईस्टर्न यूरोप है, जिसके कई सदस्यों को इन्होंने नेटो का सदस्य बनाया है, और ये जो है फिर जो पूरे विश्व में जो आर्थिक भूचाल आएगा वो तो भारत पर निश्चित रूप से प्रभाव डालेगा ही। ऑयल की कीमत बढ़ेगी तो दिख ही रहा है। ब्रेंट क्रूड जो है वो पहले ही 100 पार कर चुका है, 105 तक पहुंच रहा है। और उसके अतिरिक्त जो सारे के सारे आपके जो एक्सपोर्ट इंपोर्ट की रिजीम है वो भी अस्त व्यस्त हो जाएगी। हमारा अमेरिका के साथ 300 बिलियन का ट्रेड है, 300 बिलियन डॉलर का, और रूस के साथ सिर्फ 10 बिलियन डॉलर का ट्रेड है। ऐसे में अपने आप को अलग रखना एक बहुत ही, मैं कहूँगा कि एक रियल पॉलिटिक का, वैसे तो हम काफ़ी मजाक उड़ाते रहते हैं मोदी जी का मास्टर स्ट्रोक के लिए, लेकिन ये जो है ये निश्चित रूप से मैं इसको मास्टर स्ट्रोक मानूंगा कि मुझे किसी भी तरह से, मैं इसके लिए तैयार नहीं हूँ, यदि मुझसे व्यक्तिगत रूप से पूछा जाए, कि अमेरिका जैसे अनरिलायबल और जो सदैव से एक साम्राज्यवादी सोच रखने वाला एक ऐसा देश है, और जो रूस का तो 1991 के बाद से हमारे ऊपर कोई ऐसा विपरीत प्रभाव नहीं रहा, लेकिन जो पूरा का पूरा जो वेस्टर्न सिस्टम है लेड बाय द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स, अमेरिका जिसका नेता है, जिसका कायद है जिसको बोलते हैं, वो हमारे यहाँ हर तरह से डिसरप्शन करने का प्रयास करता रहता है। उसके हर प्रकार के हमारे यहाँ हस्तक्षेप हैं, सांस्कृतिक रूप से हस्तक्षेप है, एकेडमिक रूप से हस्तक्षेप है, और जो उनका जो डीप स्टेट है, हो सकता है स्टेट टू स्टेट तो हमारे जो संबंध हैं वो बहुत अच्छे हैं, इकोनॉमी का हमारा जो एंटेंगलमेंट है बहुत अच्छा है, सामरिक दृष्टि से हम काफ़ी साजो सामान अब अमेरिका से ले रहे हैं जो पहले हम दूसरे देशों से लिया करते थे। ये सब बात ठीक है, लेकिन जो वहाँ की जो डीप स्टेट है और जो वहाँ का जो नैरेटिव है वो भारत को आज भी एक उपनिवेश की तरह देखता है, उपनिवेश की तरह बर्ताव करता है, और यदि उसका बस चले तो वो भारत को 1 मिनट में युगोस्लाविया बनाने में हिचक न करे। तो इसलिए यदि इस प्रकरण में अमेरिका कमजोर होता है तो मैं उसमें कोई नुकसान नहीं देखता।
संजय भाई, आपने ये तो बिल्कुल सही कहा कि अमेरिका के साथ भी खासकर ट्रेड को लेके, और कई ऐसी ट्रेड ही नहीं, हमारा आईटी सेक्टर बहुत डिपेंडेंट है अमेरिका की मेहरबानी पर, तो बहुत से इंटरेस्ट जुड़ जाते हैं। पर रशिया हैज बीन अ ट्राइड एंड टेस्टेड फ्रेंड फॉर डेकेड्स। जब कोई नहीं खड़ा होता रहा हमारे सामने साथ, रशिया खड़ा होता रहा। दूसरा, कभी भी रशिया ने हमें इंटरनेशनल फोरम पे ह्यूमिलिएट नहीं किया जैसे अमेरिका करता है। यहाँ रिलीजियस फ्रीडम नहीं है, यहाँ जेनोसाइड हो रही है, कोई पता नहीं कि ये इस्लामिक जेनोसाइड को लेके हम पे सैंक्शंस आ जाए। तो इस लिहाज से रशिया का फेवर करना, थोड़ा कम से कम थोड़ा तो टिल्ट दिखना चाहिए कि हम अपने ट्राइड एंड टेस्टेड फ्रेंड और एलाय के साथ खड़े हैं। हालांकि यू आर राइट दैट बैलेंसिंग एक्ट इज वेरी नेसेसरी, पर थोड़ा कम से कम नहीं दिखना चाहिए दुनिया को कि हम उनको ना तो कंडेम करेंगे, और हम समझते हैं उनकी मजबूरियां, जिस मजबूरियों की वजह से उनको यूक्रेन के साथ युद्ध तक की नौबत आ गई।
दैट वी अंडरस्टैंड ऑफ कोर्स। एक चीज़ तो बिल्कुल क्लियर है, हेनरी किसिंजर ने खुद कहा था दैट टू बी एन एनिमी ऑफ अमेरिका इज डेंजरस बट टू बी अ फ्रेंड ऑफ अमेरिका इज फेटल। दैट इज समथिंग दैट एवरीबडी नोज। मेरा पॉइंट ये है कि जो मैंने कहा आपको कि इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस में, अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संबंधों में जो अत्यधिक महत्वपूर्ण है वो हमें अपने सरोकारों के हिसाब से चलना है, और हमें यहाँ पर कोई आइडियोलॉजिकल जजमेंट नहीं देना है, हमें जजमेंटल नहीं होना है। इसलिए ना हमें कंडेम करना है, ना हमें तारीफ करनी है। और जहाँ तक ये टिल्ट की बात है, तो देखिए ये केस बाय केस डिसाइड होता है आजकल। जब मैं ये कहता हूँ कि भारत के वो जो है वो भारत का वो जो आइडियोलॉजिकल बैगेज है वो अब नहीं है, तो उसका अर्थ यही है कि हमें किसी के प्रति इसलिए टिल्ट नहीं होना है कि भाई वो कभी ज़माने में 20 साल 30 साल पहले उसने हमारा ये किया था, आज भी करता है। तो जिस हद तक वो करता है उसमें हम यदि उसको कंडेम नहीं कर रहे हैं, तो भी ये पूरे विश्व के द्वारा एक टिल्ट ही देखा जा रहा है।
हम्म,
जो इसको वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड यदि उसका इंटरप्रिटेशन कर रहा है, तो वो उसको एक टिल्ट के रूप में ही देख रहा है। भले हम ये कहते रहें कि साहब कि हम बैलेंस कर रहे हैं, और हम जो भारतीय हैं वो ये समझे कि ये बैलेंस्ड है, लेकिन उनका जो वर्ल्ड व्यू है, जो वेस्ट का जो वर्ल्ड व्यू है, सेल्फ राइटियस वर्ल्ड व्यू है। बल्कि मेरे विचार से यदि आप ये पूछेंगे कि ये स्थिति क्यों आई, तो ये स्थिति भी तो वेस्ट की सेल्फ राइटियसनेस के कारण आई है। कल मैंने एक प्रोग्राम किया था छोटा सा,
हाँ,
18
तोते
मिनट।
की कहानी वो जरूर से that was so charming, that was so charming, please वो तो सुननी है दोबारा।
वो उसको अगर दूसरी तरह से कहें तो वो ये है कि ये यूक्रेन के लिए सही होता है कि साहब के अगर आपको जहर की दवा नहीं मालूम हो तो सांप के बिल में हाथ नहीं देना चाहिए। तो वो तोते की कहानी को यदि दूसरे रूप में उसको कहें, नहीं वैसे आप कहेंगे तो मैं उसको दोबारा सुना दूंगा, ऐसी कोई बात नहीं है।
सुनेंगे सुनेंगे।
जी
और
जी
अपने
जी।
दर्शकों को बता दें, थोड़ी देर में हमारे साथ प्रोफेसर गौतम सेन भी जुड़ने वाले हैं लंदन से। इन सवालों पर उनके भी बहुत अच्छा अध्ययन है, पर संजय दीक्षित जी का अंदाजे बयान ही कुछ और है। तो प्लीज, क्यों ये यूक्रेन ने सांप के बिल में हाथ डाला, और क्यों रशिया को ये स्टेप कदम उठाना पड़ा?
देखिए, रशिया का जब डिसइंटीग्रेशन हुआ था, या डिसइंटीग्रेशन क्या, कि अगर आप देखें तो जो सोवियत यूनियन का जो संविधान है 1924 का, उसमें सारे रिपब्लिक्स को सिसेशन के अधिकार दिए हुए हैं। तो ऐसा नहीं था कि कोई रशिया जो है वो सिसेशन के लिए बिल्कुल तैयार था कि सबको अलग कर दे। लेकिन ये वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज़ ने जब ये फैसिलिटेट किया, तो ये अंडरस्टैंडिंग उस समय बनाई थी कि भाई रशिया का जो स्फीयर ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंस है उसमें पश्चिम हस्तक्षेप नहीं करेगा, और इसको ऐतिहासिक रूप से देखा जाना चाहिए, क्योंकि रशिया के अपने सिक्योरिटी कंसर्न हैं, डीप इनसिक्योरिटीज हैं जो कि इतिहास में केंद्रित हैं, नेपोलियन के समय से यदि आप आरंभ करें तो, या उससे भी पूर्व जाए तो। अब रूस जो है वो अपने अलग तरह का साम्राज्यवाद करता रहा है, लेकिन उसका जो अधिकतर साम्राज्यवाद था विश्व सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर के पहले, वो सबका सब ईस्ट की तरफ था, पूर्व की तरफ था। अब उसके बाद फिर इन्होंने एक तरह से मैं कहूँ कि जो वार्सा पैक्ट कंट्रीज थी, पहले वहाँ पर नेटो का एक्सपेंशन आरंभ किया, लेकिन प्यूटिन ने जो अभी एक बड़ी अच्छी स्पीच दी थी, इनफैक्ट पुतिन हैज बीन गिविंग सम ग्रेट स्पीचेस, आई मस्ट से
यस।
दैट, and people who are full of political correctness should actually watch those speeches and learn from them. That he is so clear and so straightforward about the interests of his country and how he's going to protect the interests of the country. तो उसमें जो सेंचुरी ऑफ बिट्रेयल की बात की है, और उसमें बोल्शेविक्स को, रशियन एलिट्स को, और जो वेस्टर्न प्रिटेंडिंग फ्रेंड्स को जो उन्होंने कैस्टिगेट किया है, वो दैट अबाउट सम्स इट अप। क्योंकि रशिया जो था वो पूरी तरह से तैयार था, जो आपका इकोनॉमिक सिस्टम है वेस्ट का, उसमें इंटीग्रेट होने के लिए। वो इन्होंने नहीं होने दिया, क्योंकि जो अमेरिकन एस्टैब्लिशमेंट है और जो अमेरिका की जो डीप स्टेट है, उसके जो इंस्टिंक्ट्स हैं, जो उसके शौक हैं रिजीम चेंज करने के, लोगों को क्लाइंट स्टेट्स बनाने के और पोटेंशियल क्लाइंट स्टेट्स ढूंढने के, जो उनके शौक और शगल हैं, वो उन्होंने लगातार जारी रखे। और आज जो आप देख रहे हैं वो मैं ये मानता हूँ कि रूस का उस हेजिमनी के विरुद्ध विद्रोह है।
थोड़ा सा इतिहास बता दीजिए उन व्यूअर्स के लिए जो शायद नहीं जानते कि कैसे वेस्ट ने ट्रैम्पल करने की कोशिश की रशियंस को, और वो अस्मिता किस तरह कुचली गई कम्युनिस्ट द्वारा, ये सारी बातें पुतिन ने कही। अ, एक एक बात जो मुझे बहुत प्रभावित की पुतिन की स्पीच में, कि किस इवन टोन में बात कर रहे हैं। युद्ध है, पर ऐसा नहीं कि सीना तान के और छाती फुला के और डेमोगॉगी, बिल्कुल नहीं। I was quite amazed. I wish our politicians would learn to talk in that even tone, even when they are actually at war. कोई धमकियां भरी आवाज भी नहीं। Would you not agree that that discipline in the voice and tone talks about deep resolve?
Yes, that's what I said, that his clarity, his sense of purpose, and his message, not just to his own countrymen, but also to the world, is quite exceptional. And I suppose it comes from training. He has been a top spy, and so you could give it to training. तो हालांकि हम देखते हैं कि मेलोड्रामा तो कोई भी कर सकता
हम्म,
है। हिटलर को देखें आप, तो ही वाज अ मास्टर ऑफ मेलोड्रामा। लेकिन
हम्म,
इसमें एक और मैं दर्शकों को बता देना चाहूँगा कि मैं इसमें सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर से पैरेलल ड्रॉ करता हूँ, कि जब फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड वॉर में जर्मनी पराजित हो चुका था, और जर्मनी को इन लोगों ने फिर पूरी तरह से, जर्मनी को जो इन्होंने वहाँ पर रेपरेशंस और एम्बार्गोज और कंडीशंस वो जो लगाए, जर्मनी को बिल्कुल नाक जर्मनी की रगड़ी इन्होंने। और उसका जो एक रिफ्लेक्शन था वो हिटलर के रूप में आया। और संभवतः अगर हिटलर अपने आप को ओवर स्ट्रेच नहीं करता, तो इस पूरे विश्व की कोई कहानी ही कुछ और होती।
हम्म,
तो अब जब 1991 में यूक्रेन अलग हुआ, बाकी आपके सेंट्रल एशियन रिपब्लिक्स अलग हुए, बाल्टिक रिपब्लिक्स अलग हुए, आपके कॉकेशियन रिपब्लिक्स, ये सब जब अलग हुए, तो आपको ध्यान होगा कि पहले ये एक कॉमनवेल्थ के रूप में चलते थे। फिर वार्सा पैक्ट कंट्रीज़ में धीरे-धीरे डोरे डालने शुरू किए, और निश्चित रूप से जो वेस्ट का जो स्ट्रॉन्ग पॉइंट है, जो उनकी इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रेंथ है, उसको लीवरेज करके उन्होंने उनको अपने इकोनॉमिक स्फीयर में लेना शुरू किया। फिर उन पे आपने नेटो के मेंबर्स बनाना शुरू किया। तो ये जब तक बोरिस येल्त्सिन के युग तक तो ये चल गया, लेकिन पुतिन के युग में वेस्ट को भी थोड़ा सा रियलिस्टिक होना चाहिए था, उनके सरोकारों के प्रति थोड़ा सा ध्यान रखना चाहिए था, ऐसा मेरा मानना है। एक एक करके पहले आप पोलैंड में, फिर आप बिल्कुल उनके जो, जब तक आप वार्सा पैक्ट कंट्रीज में जा रहे थे, तब तक तो एक तरह से फिर भी टॉलरेट किया जा सकता था। फिर आप जो फॉर्मर सोवियत रिपब्लिक्स थे, उसमें घुसने लगे। आपने एस्टोनिया को पकड़ा, फिर आप यूक्रेन को पकड़ना चाह रहे हैं, आप उधर जॉर्जिया के साथ में कर रहे हैं। तो आई थिंक दैट इज द पॉइंट व्हेन पुतिन सेड इनफ इज इनफ।
आपने कहा कि इकोनॉमी में तो वेलकम डॉक्टर सेन।
नमस्कार, नमस्कार।
We just let Sanjay da finish a few more points before we bring you in full-fledged. तो संजय भाई, आपने कहा कि हालांकि इकोनॉमी में हमसे काफी पीछे है, तो उस लिहाज से इकोनॉमिकली शायद हमको उतना इम्पैक्ट नहीं करेगा जितना मिलिटरली उसका रिश्ता हमारे
ना
लिए है।
हमारा लिंक जो है, we got only about $10 billion of trade with
Yes,
the
versus
USSR.
310
So that's
with
not
America.
much. So
No,
our engagement is not to that extent.
no, but my point is, it's not just कि हमारा उनके साथ ट्रेड कितना, आपने कहा कि इकोनॉमिकली दे आर वीकर देन अस। नाउ
I don't say they are weaker than us भाई, उनकी per capita
आपने कुछ
GDP तो
ऐसा
हमसे
हाँ?
per capita GDP तो उनकी हमसे काफी ज्यादा है ना। They are about I think $11,000 per capita.
एंड एजुकेशन, हेल्थ,
We
ऑल
are
दैट।
only 2,000. तो वो टोटल साइज ऑफ जीडीपी कम हो सकता है, बट आवर टोटल साइज ऑफ जीडीपी इज also related to our population. That also we have to keep in mind.
Now, despite the fact that in many matters अमेरिका के साथ मैच नहीं कर सकते, फिर भी ये जो रिजॉल्व दिखाया रशिया ने कि तुम आ जाओ मैदान में, हमें परवाह नहीं है, तो सब अब झुकते ही नजर आते हैं। What does that tell us about how India needs to defend its geopolitical interests?
I, I think India is going in the right direction in the sense that it knows and it has been asserting for a long time that we have to depend on ourselves. ये जो armaments production जो सारा का सारा भारत में करने की जो कोशिश हो रही है, well, that is, I think, that step in the direction. लेकिन हालांकि that's going to take a long time because I think we have a lag time of almost 50 years and nothing was done. And we neglected our defense industries, which actually, if you remember, uh, they used to be under Britain. We used to have a fairly good ordnance industry, which was neglected. तो उसमें टाइम लगेगा, उस टाइम को कैसे मैनेज करना है, क्या करना है, सो आई थिंक वी नीड टू सी। लेकिन मुझे लगता है, मुझे इस वक्त जो दिख रहा है वो द काइंड ऑफ वीकनेस दैट द वेस्ट हैज शोन। और यही नहीं, मैं तो बहुत समय से
Abdullah,
प्रेडिक्ट भी
your
कर रहा हूँ।
mics are creating too much noise. Please control that because I'm sure it's very distracting for Mr. Dixit. Sorry, संजय जी, मुझे बीच में रोकना पड़ा, बहुत डिस्टरबेंस आ रही थी उधर से जी।
हाँ, मैं क्या कह रहा था, लॉस्ट द ट्रैक।
आप कह रहे थे कि आर्मामेंट इंडस्ट्री हमारी, it will take time to
Yes,
become
but I think I don't really care about the Western sanctions and things. It hasn't worked in Russia, and certainly it's not going to work on India. भारत में तो बिल्कुल ही इन्होंने sanctions लगाई तो थी न्यूक्लियर वॉर के समय। तो क्या हुआ आप पे न्यूक्लियर एक्सप्लोजन जब किया था उसके बाद क्या हुआ? भारत की हाईएस्ट ग्रोथ उसी वक्त की है, आप याद करें अगर तो। जब हम डबल डिजिट ग्रोथ कर रहे थे तो उस टाइम पे थी जब हमारे ऊपर सैंक्शंस लगे हुए थे। और एक इसमें जो डीपर इशू ये है कि मुझे इस पे हमने काफ़ी डिस्कशंस किए हैं। आई हैव अ लॉट ऑफ डिस्कशंस विद पीपल लाइक राजीव मिश्रा एंड अदर्स दैट द वेस्टर्न डेमोक्रेसी is now at a juncture where it has lost its capacity to wage war with equals. और जो भी सारा का सारा जो नैरेटिव चला, मुझे लगता है कि जो इनकी जो एकेडेमिया है उसमें जो इन्फिल्ट्रेशन हुआ है लेफ्टिस्ट थॉट का, उसने धीरे धीरे इनको इतना खोखला कर दिया है। पॉलिटिकल करेक्टनेस इस लेवल तक आ गई है, फैमिली स्ट्रक्चर्स डिस्ट्रॉय हो चुके हैं। उसके कारण ये अब इनकी जो सेनाएं हैं वो कॉन्स्क्रिप्शन के अलावा आपको दिखता नहीं होगा कि वो वॉलंटरी फोर्सेस आपको नहीं दिखती वेस्ट में। उसका क्या कारण है? जो नेशनलिज्म यहाँ पनपा था, जिसके कारण 2 वर्ल्ड वॉर हुए, जिसके कारण 19th सेंचुरी में वॉर्स आफ्टर वॉर्स हुए, वो नेशनलिज्म तो खत्म हो चुका है। अब उस पे और भी रिसर्च करने की जरूरत है कि भाई इज इट excessive money floating which has created that kind of a situation, that sense of well-being, comfort which nobody wants to give up. ठीक है, if the nation suffers humiliation, so be it. इस तरह की चीजें आप देखिए कि यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स तो वियतनाम में हारा, अफगानिस्तान में हारा, कभी अपने बराबर के किसी एडवर्सरी से सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर के बाद, ऐसा सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर में भी तभी घुसा जब उसके ऊपर अटैक हो गया, तब तक उस टाइम पे भी इधर ही उधर करता रहा। तो there is great merit in having great GDP and great per capita income, but I think you have got to look at the flip side as well.
नहीं, सिर्फ हारा नहीं, बड़े बेआबरू होके वियतनाम से निकले, बड़े बेआब उससे भी ज्यादा बेआबरू
यूक्रेन वाले को क्या किया, जिसको बोलते हैं ना हिंदी में चने के झाड़ पे चढ़ाना, उसको बेचारे को चने के झाड़ पे चढ़ा दिया।
हाँ, अभी
कोई
भी
तोते
अफगानिस्तान से
वाली कहानी, उड़ना आता नहीं और पंगे कर बैठे।
हाँ, बिल्कुल। अफगानिस्तान में जहां भी गए, केवल मेहम छोड़ के आए, मतलब तबाही के अलावा कोई भी समाज को ये ढंग से रिकंस्ट्रक्ट तो कर ही नहीं पाते। तहस नहस में ही छोड़ के आते हैं और वहां पे तालिबानी ताकतें मजबूत करके आते हैं। तो इनको क्या मॉरल हाई रहता है कि घुस जाएं फिर भी हर जगह?
वो
विथ व्हाट
दे आर रिजीम चेंज एक्सपर्ट्स रशिया को बोल रहे हैं कि आपने यूक्रेन में रिजीम चेंज ऑपरेशन कर रहे हैं। भाई इन्होंने कहाँ रिजीम चेंज ऑपरेशन नहीं किए, इन्होंने तो यूगोस्लाविया को ब्रेकअप किया, आज भी इन्होंने कोसोवो को रिकॉग्नाइज कर रखा है। वो क्या है?
नहीं, और सद्दाम हुसैन के साथ जो किया,
सद्दाम हुसैन के साथ
फेक केसेस लेके कि केमिकल गैसेस बना रहे हैं, ये करें, कुछ नहीं मिला, एंड दे हाउंडेड दैट मैन आउट, एंड व्हाट अ
वेपन्स
कंडीशन
ऑफ WMD करके पूरा कर दिया, आईसिस क्रिएट किया, उसके चक्कर में आईसिस क्रिएट हुआ इनका।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
ओबामा को देखिए, द ग्रेट पीसनिक, आई थिंक द लॉन्गेस्ट नंबर ऑफ वॉर्स वे फॉट ड्यूरिंग ओबामास regime. तो मैं तो एक्चुअली वेस्ट की हिपोक्रेसी पे तो बहुत समय से तंज करता आ रहा हूँ।
और आपको लगता है कि रिजीम चेंज का बुखार हिंदुस्तान के भी प्रति इनका चढ़ रहा है?
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल है। आप देखिए इनके जो डीप स्टेट हैं, जिनकी एकेडेमिया है, जो इनके अलग अलग तरह के जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस है, वो क्या करते रहते हैं। मतलब जो the biggest joke going around was now that Putin has invaded Ukraine, the UN should immediately condemn Nawab Malik's arrest. ये ट्विटर पे जोक चल रहा था। So that is their level. I mean, look at Biden. I mean, why have they elected that kind of a person?
Looks like a cadaver. He really looks like a cadaver to me. Wouldn't you agree? A walking corpse without life.
I don't go on the appearance of the persons.
No,
but then
actually,
his actions, right since the time he's been elected, whether it's been through the pandemic, whether it's been in his response to China, or whether it has been in response to Russia, have all been, I should say, to use a very, very civil term, below par.
Okay, very civil term indeed. अच्छा, एक सवाल है सिद्धार्थ शेखर का, ये ले लेते हैं आपके लिए. The concern for India is that China might try to take advantage of the situation and try a misadventure with India. क्या कहेंगे?
I don't agree with that. If China has to try misadventure, in fact, it's the right time for China to try taking over Taiwan.
And you would support that?
No, I would not support it. I'm just telling you a fact, because after looking at the performance of NATO and the US in Ukraine, China would feel very, very emboldened. China should think that, okay, this is the right time, as long as Biden is there. You never know, the regime changes in US and a Republican president comes in. He might respond differently. But as far as Biden, 2 years of Biden are left. So as far as Biden is concerned, I think China should be very, very hopeful that Biden will act exactly the same way as he's acting here in Ukraine.
Gautam da, welcome. You joined in at short notice because we planned to change this topic at very short notice. Now, what would you say about the possibility of China doing to Taiwan what Russia's done with Ukraine?
I'm now unmuted. Hearing Sanjay ji speak, I feel there is not very much to add. But before I speak about China, let me express one minor disagreement with him. क्योंकि आपने कहा अमेरिका में कोई वॉर नहीं जीता, ये गलत है. 1983 में एक ग्रेनाडा इन्वेट किया था, ठीक है. उस वक्त ग्रेनाडा का जीडीपी था $161 million. $161 million था ग्रेनाडा का जीडीपी. यूएस जीडीपी था 2.9 trillion. अब यूएस जीडीपी नाउ इज 23 trillion. 2 point. So वो एक तो राय जीता था, तो वो वी शुड टेक नोट ऑफ. थोड़ा डरने की बात है. अच्छा, ठीक है. अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, disagreement, Sanjay ji, I have very little to say and add. I will be very cynical, and I apologize to the viewers and to my Taiwanese friends. Two things. Yes, the US misadventure, actually a stupid misadventure, has endangered Taiwan. Bilkul. But there are some additional points. One is there is some internal chaos in China going on, economic chaos. The COVID is spreading much more than they are admitting. And Jinping's position is not entirely secure. ये भी मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ. उसमें internal party में कुछ गड़बड़ हो रहा है. Well, maybe that will make him bolder. Maybe he thinks this will be a good time to distract attention. But I still think ultimately Taiwan is much more serious for the US. The geopolitical implications of the loss of Taiwan for the whole region because of its location will be extremely consequential. So maybe the US will join. The only reason the US may join in defense is because they will have to use few land forces. This will be basically a naval battle at some distance. So they may therefore feel that, okay, basically we will be in the Taiwan states, we will interdict any Chinese occupying forces, we will sink their boats. So, Jose, well, let me now say the thing which is very cynical, and I apologize again. Taiwan गिरने से हमारे भारत के लिए कुछ problem नहीं है. It is not inconvenient for us. The simple reason, it will mobilize the whole of Asia against China and give us some breathing space. You see, the whole of Asia, from Malaysia even, the most timid of all the countries, Singapore, Chota Desh, वो भी very tough armed forces, Vietnam तो भी, Indonesia, Thailand, they will all be in an arms race. Then, of course, there is Japan. Now, Japan, of course, does not even sneeze without permission from Washington, but they have been building up their armed forces. And if you look at the Japanese Navy and Air Force, इससे जल्दी जल्दी टक्कर मत लीजिए. ये पीस लविंग देश नहीं बना 45 के बाद. ये लड़ाई करने का इसका बहुत ताकत है. So it will militarize and mobilize against China, which will be breathing space for us. So it is not a disaster for us. I do not wish this on the Taiwanese people because Taiwan and China are one country. I completely agree, but not under a communist dictatorship in Beijing. If there was a democracy, a genuine democracy in China, I would say, ठीक है, and then Taiwanese themselves, and they must choose. They must choose. And China, if it was wise, would wait for a pro-Chinese government to win power in Taiwan if they were smart. But if you read about Chinese history, there is a lot of evidence. China is a master for making mistakes in foreign policy. They are autistic in their foreign policy. They do everything else rather well. domestic production का हो, science का हो, technology है तो 2000 साल से China has been a great success, but in foreign policy, and I won't go through that, but there are wonderful books written, in fact, in the 70s by leading scholars which pointed this out. So you can rely on them to make mistakes. Now, in 62, within China, it was told, don't pick a quarrel with India. You will create a formidable enemy unnecessarily. Why? India had to wake up after that. They had no choice, and India reformed its armed forces. Now, my only problem with India is that, India is not ready to fight a big war. It's not ready to fight a big war, and it doesn't need a big war. India needs 25 years of peace to consolidate at home. And I think our leadership across the political spectrum understands this. When I talk to senior diplomats, they all say, "Hame shanti chahiye." And a war now will derail us. We will lose a decade. We don't want this to happen. So diplomacy is the only way to delay the inevitable. China has got every incentive to deal with India now, because in 10 years' time, with a $5 to $7 trillion economy, India will be much harder to deal with. So they have a great incentive to deal with us now rather than later. But Modi has done the right thing.
When you say deal with us, are you saying make peace with us or come and gobble us up? Which one do you mean?
No, to knock us out of the chessboard.
Okay.
Hit us. Now, having said that, Modi and his team have done the right thing. They have risen to the challenge. They've done as much as possible to say, we will make it difficult for you. You may prevail if you fight for a year, but in the first 6 months, it will not be easy. 6 महीना तक हम बहुत लड़ाई कर सकते हैं, and we will give them a very hard time. And our armed forces are very professional. And in China, we all know, they are one-child family. They don't want to lose their sons. Exactly the problem for Russia too. That is why they also left Afghanistan, as I said earlier. Mothers were protesting that our only child has died. So China will have the same problem. Well, our professional soldiers will give them a hard fight. We have a tough army. It may not have unlimited equipment like China can produce, but we have decent equipment now. Again, thank you, Mr. Modi, for that. We are doing domestic production as far as we can, but apart from our missile technology, we are still about 25 years behind. We are about to sign a deal. I think we have signed a deal with France to co-produce a jet engine for the Tejas. Very urgent. That is the one area where we totally failed to produce an engine. But then we have a wonderful system of making sure our brightest and the best go abroad. We don't get them university admission. We don't get them jobs. And particularly, from Tamil Nadu, 80% of them are outside the state, many in America. They are running US IT industry now. And NASA mein bhare hue hai, DOD mein bhare hue hai. Are great Tamil Brahmins. Okay. We have to continue with our diplomacy to see how we can prolong this period of peace for ourselves, to grow the economy. And what Modi has done, as I've said earlier, in fact yesterday too, he has created a period of transition where there's a cost paid to it. Older firms die, there's unemployment, there's distress, newer firms come. It does not happen quickly, especially in India, where every step 2 steps you take, you have to step back 1 step. देखिए हमारे CAA का क्या हुआ, हमारे farm bills, urgent reform. Nobody had disagreed with the farm bills, were supported by everybody. Yet to retreat because of UP. Now, I still think the issue of regime change, which Sanjay ji has also mentioned, is a very urgent issue for India. Many preliminary steps are taking place. This chorus across the world, and since I'm sitting in London, I'm reading all the newspapers straight away. There is a chorus which only happens when it's orchestrated. It's an orchestrated chorus with now Noam Chomsky saying 250 million Muslims are about to be subject to murder. Anyway, that's a good thing he said that, because it just shows he's absurd. He's completely mad. So this disruption is the way people are intervening in India. They don't want to hit us too hard on the border, but they know that they have huge assets in India, our left, and they know that from the late 19th century, Islam has been an ally of every force that intervened in India. The British have used them right the way through the 30s, 47. The Americans allied with them, particularly because Pakistan joined CETO and CENTO. This is the ally they need, because they alone can do Delhi riots at the drop of a hat. They have the numbers. So that is why they are making this song and dance, so we get scared to do anything against their leaders. And I'm afraid I have sympathy for the government's hesitation, because the cost of cracking down, we do not know how high it will be. They really want particularly Modi out of the picture. They particularly think Modi is the problem because they can deal with the other leadership of the BJP. They think we can do a deal with them. And same with Yogi. Modi and Yogi are two people they do not like. And I very much fear for their personal safety. मैंने कहा पहले भी ये पंजाब में जो हुआ ये ट्रायल रन था. This was a trial run. And assassinating Modi will accomplish many tasks. It will throw India into chaos. And it will remove him as well. So please, I say to all those responsible, ensure our Prime Minister's security. And please, Prime Minister, do not take the kind of risks I see you occasionally doing by jumping into the crowd. Because Prime Minister now belongs to India. He's no longer his own person. So he belongs to all of us. So hum bachenge, I think, because we are not doing so badly. We have to avoid crises. And we are quite adept at sidestepping issues. We have to be careful not to cause too much offense to even our adversaries and not to get angry because the government is doing it. Though it is extremely angering, I restrain myself when I see this. And Modi has played this Ukraine crisis quite well. अच्छा से किया, कुछ नहीं कहा. Peace, diplomacy, yes, of things he has said, which is a correct thing. Now, there are some areas where Modi could have done more. I know, Madhu, you feel that. I do feel in the CA protest, he could have cut off the demonstrators and forced them.
Listen to this comment on the screen by Shanti. Legends attack rogue countries. Faltu Vishwaguru can't even clear road blockades of frauds and anti-nationals. You know, it's devastating comment on the way. Now, the two points arise, and I'd like both of you, Sanjay ji and Gautam to answer this. One, we see how Putin is no less endangered. The entire Western world would like to see him eliminated. Now, the point I'm making is here's a man who doesn't care what the West says about him, what the West writes about Russian leadership, what the West will do by way of sanctions. He's saying, I know my own country's geopolitical interests better than all of you put together, and I'm not going to bother. Now, here we are. ये जो रोड ब्लॉक भी नेशनल हाईवे ब्लॉक 2-2 साल रहे किस देश में आपके स्टेट का क्या इमेज रह जाता है I also want Modi ji to have be Amar, live long. I certainly don't want to see him harmed. But isn't that a short way to harm yourself? हम बहुत से लोग सोच रहे हैं कि जैसे पुतिन ने यूक्रेन को जाके कब्जा कर लिया बस अब मोदी जी भी जाके पीओके को कब्जा करने वाले हैं वो कर सकते हैं तो हम क्यों नहीं कर सकते बट दूसरा जो रियलिटी है कि हम एक रोड ब्लॉक नहीं हटा सके लफंगों का
Madhuji, I really sympathize with you and the questioner. I feel very much the same. But I will add this. I think the use of force would have been a mistake because that is exactly what the Khalistanis wanted. So there would have been bloodshed. And you only need a little bit. But what he did not do, and that was possible as Yogi ji demonstrated, you need to have appropriate legislation to impose swinging financial penalties of the leadership. Now, maybe they calculated this would also be too provocative. I am not in a position to judge, but they could have done that. Definitely, that is something I've written about. I've given detailed ideas about how you could do that. And Yogi ji has demonstrated, courts have now said that the form in which they were done was not appropriate, but he could have legislated, made them bankrupt. That is what he did not do. But I actually think the reluctance to use force was the correct one. On the question of Russia and India, what can I say? You know, the Europeans and the Americans don't own much equity in Russia. They own a lot of equity in India. They have the university, they have JNU, they have Jamia Millia. They have so much equity. They have so many pressure points on India that we are not in the same. Russia, though, was quite patient, actually. The encirclement of Russia was extraordinary. And I won't go through that because Sanjay ji has mentioned all the countries. And Ukraine was going to be the final blow. It was going to be equivalent to the Chinese to put missiles in the Terai region of Nepal. That is what it would have been. Like, Terai hai hamare border. Sorry?
Sanjay, he's talked about a lot of other things, but he did not mention the positioning of missiles in. Could you
This
please?
is a very simple calculation of the Russians are
No, no,
perfectly aware.
that is if it becomes a NATO country, that automatically happens.
Yes, of course. You see, you put intercontinental ballistic missiles in Ukraine, and then the missiles are protected by NATO. So if you attack Ukraine, you attack the whole of NATO. That is the NATO treaty, that one member attack means all members attack. So then you secure your missiles. The Russians won't dare to attack. But what the missile does is reduces the time it takes to hit Russia to about 4 minutes, which means they have no time to react. And then what happens, the calculation is you hit the Russian land-based missiles, and then your ABM systems can stop the missiles which Russia will use to retaliate from the oceans, from the submarines. So this is a threat. Obviously, this is a very unreal situation, but nuclear weapon deterrence is unreal. So then we use that to blackmail Russia, do what you want them to do, leave Syria, ye mat karo, wo mat karo. Now, Russia was a great power, and you bring the threat to Russia to its borders. The last time this happened, they lost 30 million people and almost 60% of the industry. Koi bardasht nahi karenge. Do you think India would accept nuclear missiles put by China in Nepal? No. Would they accept that happen? They done it in Pakistan because those nuclear missiles are basically tested in Lopnor, and the missiles were provided by North Korea. So these are Chinese missiles outsourced to Pakistan to threaten us. But we will not accept this happening in Nepal. So what Putin did was understandable. It was unavoidable. And the Americans knew this. But they got the consolation prize they were seeking at this very high cost to Ukraine, which is that they got the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline cancelled. They've been really wanting that to be cancelled. It's part of the wider geopolitics of energy, which also explains why they intervened in Syria. It was all about gas pipelines. So, ye kya? But as Sanjay ji has said earlier, ये लड़ाई करने के लिए तैयार नहीं है, इसको लड़ाई करने का क्षमता नहीं है, ये लड़ाई नहीं करने वाले. But there are other ways, you see. They may fight naval wars, but they will not put their boots on the ground. But we are very alone in this world. We are very alone. We have no friend. Nobody is going to come to our aid. Maybe the Americans will give us intelligence. Maybe they'll see it as an opportunity to sell us weapons at high costs, though these weapons may not be very useful because you need to be trained in their use. Particularly, the F-35 and all, you cannot just use them next day. And what else? Warm words of encouragement? Kuch nahi karne wale hai. Who will help us? If the US doesn't help us, nobody else will dare. These are all dikhawat. We are alone. We have to rely on ourselves. And the most important thing lacking in India today, the most shocking, shameful thing in India today, is that the DMK and the CPI goes to the Chinese embassy to celebrate the Communist Party's founding of the Communist Party. I could accept to celebrate something to do with China. But this murderous, genocidal party's founding is celebrated by some of India's leading political parties. We are a disunited country. We are a country full of traitors. There's no other way to put it. However, Modi has made a big dent on this. He has broken the caste barrier in UP. And this is what he has to keep doing elsewhere. Now I see in Tamil Nadu also, some steps have been taken. And you can't deny him the credit because that was the name they were using in the campaign, Modi. So I say there are many things I want, and I'm so disappointed Modi ji aapne nahi liya, but he has done more than anybody. And virtually anybody in several hundred years. A difficult country with a relatively powerless central government controlled by Supreme Court and federalism and foreign intervention. I mean, I'm looking at the Indian newspapers today, and I'm realizing the degree of foreign control is very deep. So, he is not as powerful as we would like him to be. Saath saal to kuch nahi, blink of the eye. Let's see after 24, because the thing I want most from him now is that he change the narrative that will unite us in our education. That is the one thing they must do. It will take a bit of time. 5-7 saal lagega. Then you will see that the people will wake up because they're all being miseducated and misinformed. We have to stop doing that. And the thing which really matters to me a lot, hamare mandir chhod dijiye. I have sent a plan to the people who matter, a very careful plan as to how they will proceed. It can be done. It will be a bit chaotic, but Sanjay ji will know more about this. So please let me stop and allow him to speak.
Sanjay ji,
I need to leave in 5 minutes, so I will just.
Okay, so
join the issue on one of the things that Madhuji said. Uh, See, the comparing the domestic situation and international situation, I think is not proper. And nobody has castigated Modi more on the standoff and the siege of Delhi than I have done. But at the same time, I have applauded almost every step that Modi has taken in the international arena. And I think the problem that is with Narendra Modi as far as the internal security is concerned, that is the man is simply too political. And every step that he takes internally, he weighs the political outcomes. And that creates problems a number of times. And that is where I think the constituency that elects him needs to probably put pressure on him a little more, probably educate him a little more, and of course for that, that constituency itself needs to be educated, and that's what we try to do from time to time. So that is the main problem. And I think the one lesson that the people need to draw out of Ukraine is, I think the Western failure should actually galvanize Indian opinion and give them confidence that these are all men of straw. And they can only do, all they can do is to create strawmen and destroy them. And they can't really fight a real war. And therefore, they should take them head on. And I think it should give confidence to our political class also, that if they can be intimidated in such a way, then India need not fear the public opinion assault that often emanates from the West. It should hold its own. After all, Putin didn't care two hoots for them. We might care one hoot, but we don't need to care two hoots for them. So that is what I would advise. And now I would.
Can I ask you a quick question and you answer that? A lot of
Yeah.
people are expecting, I reiterate what I said in the beginning. You see social media full of expectations that now Modi ji will be encouraged to do what Putin has done in Ukraine.
He's
He
not
will
doing that.
in
Don't be under any kind of illusion that he's going to do a Putin. As Gautamji said, and I concur, that we need to strengthen ourselves considerably before we do that. I mean, the Russian military strength has been around for decades. So we need to at least be fully independent as far as our military hardware is concerned.
Before
और
Sanjay
जो
ji goes, can
आपने
I just
कहा
add one
आपने
quick
कहा
point?
संजय जी just one second let me get him before he leaves. आपने कहा मोदी जी पॉलिटिकल आउटकम्स की तरफ ज्यादा ध्यान देते हैं जो इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी के इश्यूज हैं. वो मैं वोकैबुलरी समझ नहीं पाई है जो यूफेमिज्म आपने इस्तेमाल किया. जैसे आपने खुद ही कहा कि जो रोड ब्लॉक्स हुए, जो इंटरनल सबवर्जन हुई, तो उसमें तो पॉलिटिकल आउटकम भी फेवरेबल नहीं रहा ना. तो क्या मिला अपने को इतना कमजोर करने से?
No, not political outcome in the sense, I think he was looking more at UP, as Gautamji said, not at Punjab. Punjab, in any case, was not never the strong suit. I don't think anybody was under any kind of illusion within the BJP that they could win Punjab. Never. That's not going to happen. They didn't have a presence there. All they used to fight was 23 seats out of 117. How could they expect to do anything better than that? So not Punjab, but UP, as Gautam himself said. So I think, but when you do all these political calculations, you often try and err on the side of caution, and you overdo this. That creates a problem. On the other hand, my calculation would have been that if you took strong action, then maybe you would have probably benefited more. Like inaction in West Bengal. The inaction in West Bengal has hurt his image like nothing had done till that point of time.
और
And then,
शाहीन बाग
or Shaheen Bagh for that matter. But probably had his own calculation. I think one weakness of his is that he tries to cultivate an international image. That's what I think.
See, you didn't have to fire bullets, Sanjay ji. All you had to do was जो योगी जी ने क्या किया उनको हटाने के
No,
लिए.
I agree. I told you that probably you have not criticized him as much as I have done. 26th January was the perfect day. You could have done anything on that day and nobody would have batted an eyelid. So if you
So
can
we are
permit me
not
now.
going to see Modi ji in Putin avatar.
That is not in the next 5 years.
2 साल अभी हैं, 5 years तो फिर 7 साल बच जाएंगे ना. अभी तो 2 ही साल बचे. जैसे किया था 2019 से पहले आर्टिकल 370 गया, ये वो ऐसा कुछ होने की संभावना दिखती है आपको?
Not right now.
Not right now. So it will be timid handling.
No, I think we are mixing up two issues. We're talking about an international situation and we're trying to mix up internal politics. I distinguished between the two very clearly, and I said that very clearly that his handling of the international situation has been excellent. So let's not mix up the two. Let's keep the international and domestic apart.
Would you count Pakistan as international or internal?
It is international. I think it's been handled fairly competently.
Pakistan you think has been handled fairly competently?
Fairly competently. Okay. It's, look at the way it has been completely isolated. Look at where its economy is going. Look at the FATF. Look at the other things. Look at the way it keeps Pakistan on its toes and also keeps fooling them through back channel dialogues. So I think it's very, very competent handling.
Okay. Though Pakistan doesn't have those aspirations of being a flourishing economy, they are a launch pad for terror. And that's their self-definition. Their main goal
Ma'am,
is...
I'm completely out of time. I just have to leave.
Okay, Sanjay ji. Thank you very much for your time.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Thank you, Gautam ji.
Namaskar, Sanjay ji.
Ji. So, Gautam da, what's likely? Is it the start of something resembling a third world war? Can it lead to that? Or is it going to be over in a few days now that Russia has established its muscle power?
Let me just say something quickly about what Sanjay ji said before going about Indians being unduly concerned with what is said in the West. I think it is less now than it used to be. I do believe it is less now. It is still far too much. But one of the things that we need to understand that the Congress ecosystem in the entire institutional framework of India is intact. I hear too much of people who call sabotaging government policy. And these people are all there, like Chidambaram's people remain in position. So this is one issue. The other is, some of the people, bureaucracy, who advise him are giving him the constant refrain, do not annoy the Americans. He's getting this from all and sundry, including the NRIs who have a stake in the US and very little in India. So these are issues which we need to take on board. Now, I also would like to add, I do not think Modi is doing it for his image. I really do not feel Modi is cultivating his image. He's using it definitely to convey an impression of bonhomie, that I'm not the dangerous fascist you think. He's using it. But I think, he is the first leader whose motive is actually located in our domestic interest. He really is thinking, of course, he may have to behave in a way which appears that he is pleasing others, but I really feel the first time after Shastri, we have somebody who is really focused on internal dynamics, partly because of his culture, his background, his institutional upbringing. So leave that aside. So I will defend him on that. And like Sanjay ji, I think his foreign policy has been very good. He's got some good people around him. It will not lead to third world war. Definitely, it will not do. And already Putin is negotiating with the Ukrainian opposition. And I'm reading a survey which says 60% of Ukrainians want better relations with Russia. I don't know if this is an accurate reflection. But what is likely to happen is that he will create a regime which the US will describe as a puppet regime. But this regime will make some peace. Now, he has now today said what he wants. He has asked for three things. One, that the new Ukrainian government recognize Russia's sovereignty over Crimea, which used to belong to Russia up to 1954, that Ukraine will not join NATO, and three, offensive weapons will not be located in Ukraine. These are the three demands he's made for withdrawing. But I think before he withdraws, he will likely set up an alternative government, because there were always people who supported the previous president Lukashenko. So this is what he'll do, and he'll leave. And poor Ukraine will also then suffer sanctions, because it will be denounced as a puppet regime. So the new regime in Ukraine, now Ukraine is not a small country. It has a population of 43, 44 million, and very mineral rich. I don't think the Russians were very concerned about that, though they were competing for minerals in the Ukraine with the Americans. This was not their primary motive, because they had basically given up, and now he has basically given up on the demand which was there earlier, that the Ukraine should not join the European Union. This is not mentioned in the three demands. So he does not want them to join. He does not insist on them joining the economic union created by the Russian Federation with its allies in Central Asia. So he's also making concessions, but they really pushed him into a corner, and this was totally unnecessary. I mean, as John Mersheimer had said even 6-7 years ago, they're leading Ukraine up the garden path and going to ensure its destruction. He said that. It's on YouTube. He said that ye kar raha hai galat. Well, that's what's happened. I was aware this was going to happen. I was only thinking maybe the West will concede before the invasion, the demands of Ukraine not being NATO. They will concede that before the invasion happens. But I think they wanted the invasion to happen, because that forced the German hand, and cancellation of the Nord Stream 2 took place, which is what they were thinking is our constitutional price, no matter what happens, at whatever cost to the Ukraine. The Ukrainians have been very, very foolish, led by a very foolish leadership.
It's clear that it's been a big misadventure for the Ukrainian leadership. Now, the point I'd like you to clarify is, how could they not have calculated the risks involved, especially since the demands made by Russia are fairly modest? They weren't asking for the moon. They were not asking for the kind of servility that America expects of its client states. And they were doing quite well with all the mineral wealth. They don't really need American patronage for their economy to do well. And being on good terms with their giant neighbor, Russia, would obviously be to an advantage. What happened to Ukrainian leadership? I mean, were they duped?
You were asking a very pertinent question, Madhuji, and I've been thinking about this all morning, trying to make sense, because obviously, as you are suggesting, what they did was unreasonable. There's only one explanation that I could come up with, that Zelensky was a complete puppet, and if he did not do what he was told, he would be replaced, because they put him in power in 2014. He had no room for maneuver. These regimes, which are controlled by the US, basically comply with whatever demands. I think that's what he did. He just complied. But it cannot be that he didn't know the Russians would intervene. He must have known that part. He must have assumed the Russians would intervene. And they must have had enough intelligence to show that the preparations were well advanced. But I think he did what the Americans told him to do. Kuch mat karo. Aane do. This is the price we will pay.
More advantages. That's the point I'm making. If you had to be a puppet regime, you at least calculate your interests and figure out which puppetry works better in your interest.
Because Russians would have replaced him. They would have found somebody else, regardless of what policy.
If he was a good puppet man, then they would need to replace him. He chose to be an American puppet, which is why they had to replace him.
Yeah, but he actually, I think he was very supine. He was intellectually incompetent, very supine. He had no political background. That is why he was chosen. And I think he correctly assumed that no matter what happened, his job would be on the line if they move towards Russia. Both parties would consider him dispensable, both the Americans and the Russians, for different reasons. So he went along. This seems to be quite mystifying, considering the price being paid by his country. But I'm afraid there are many, many leaders who have led their countries into disaster many times in history. This is not unusual, and he is one of them. And he has done a great disservice because Ukraine was a natural buffer state. There are buffer states in many parts of the world where there are tensions. You have to accept that. Like Nepal is a buffer state. Like Finland was a buffer state. Then Finland didn't play ball, and they got crushed. By the Russians in 1940. Now, all of this you see is now the price the Ukrainians will pay, and of course there will be a lot of Ukrainian hostility towards the Russians, no matter which regime is in power. They will not be happy, and the Ukrainians recall the terrible famines and suffering during the wave of collectivization after 1928 that Stalin had unleashed, because Ukraine was a key breadbasket for the whole region. And they actually, looking at their history, they have suffered desperately. Their geopolitical location has left them very vulnerable, like the Poles. They've always been on the receiving end. So I have a huge sympathy for their predicament. But, you need good politicians when you have such a difficult situation. And this seems to be somewhat lacking in the world in general. Look at the way the British Prime Minister is using this crisis to secure himself against the allegations of misconduct with partying in Downing Street. He's using this shamelessly to divert attention. And his foreign secretary is using it in the hope that if he goes, I have achieved prominence. His foreign secretary is now also using this by trying to position ourselves to succeed him. So, they're all a bunch of rascals. What can I say?
I want you to take note of this question on the screen, but a bigger one from LK Intelligence. Ashish, can you bring it on screen? Both our speakers, for very good reasons, brought forth this argument that Modi ji is doing extremely well with regard to foreign policy, while he is also the best thing that has happened to India in decades, or some will say centuries. I think you said centuries. And that he's trying to bolster the economy, the economic power, the military power of India, etc. Now, this kind of feeling and sentiment that LK Intelligence represents is rampant, at least on social media. Can we humbly agree that the one who hates Hindus and throw them under bus for fake image cannot be a nationalist, however hard he tried? Let us be true. And then it was followed by how Modi cannot ever be a Putin even in 100 lifetimes. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is this, especially with Putin having shown that you can caucus look at the West, that they are strawmen, and if you stand firm, they actually have no choice but to yield ground. Now, the point is that in the last few years, with each such crisis that we faced internally, two things. One, internally, whenever he's been challenged by those who hate him most, who want him dead, all those of us who are worried about his safety are worried about his safety, not from any natural causes. His good health and he's taking good care of his health. It's from these people, the Shaheen Bagh Walas, the Khalistanis at the Punjab border. And he actually appeared so weak and he allowed himself to be humiliated. That's really what is making people enrage against him. Or his silence when Hindus are slaughtered. Be they in Kashmir, be they in Bengal, be they in Delhi, be they in any state of India, or the Palghar sadhus, not one word of condemnation. Whereas, and people always compare it to his his heart oozing sympathy for Shabana Azmi's few scratches or whatever happened to her in a road accident. Now, the point is, This sentiment is growing. Why is he indifferent to it? Especially after Bengal election and the way they abandoned their cadre, they handed them over to the wolves. This sentiment has grown. It should worry Modi ji. It should worry Modi ji. He should understand that he's not going to get Muslim votes, no matter what he does. They may make a tiny dent. And globally, nobody is impressed. The Americans aren't impressed. The Europeans aren't impressed. They're accusing him of running a regime that's carrying out a genocide. Now, you just said uh, that crackpot Marxist intellectual, what's his name, who said
Chomsky.
25 Chomsky. Yeah, you may not take him seriously, but there's a whole world that takes him damn seriously. And they think his words need to be weighed in gold. The point is, he's not succeeding in combating demonization of his personhood. And in the process, he's getting Hindus demonized globally. Why is he not sensitive to that? And Putin should wake him up that if you do the strong man and you give them a punch in the nose, then not only will they respect you, but your own people will feel empowered. Today, we don't feel empowered because we are all being targeted, defamed, demonized as fascists. I'm sure you also in London told that you are supporting a fascist regime.
Yes, I mean, there are things which disappoint me, and I also accept that I feel periodically the reaction of the government could have been different. But I also accept that, the government at the center is far less powerful than we imagine. It is besieged on all sides. And I have to leave it to them to make the calculation of which fronts they will not open. Now, those calculations can be wrong. And I certainly think the failure to sanction the leaders of these illegal protests was mistaken. I would say that. But, I have to say that if you don't win elections in India, what you feel has no meaning. So they have to be calculating about elections, which is why they withdrew the farm bill.
I'm also saying be calculating about elections, and your real vote bank is the Hindu vote bank. Be respectful towards it. Don't take it for granted.
I would say yes, but that vote bank may not be so consequential outside the urban area. May not be so consequential. Though I keep saying the urban areas are your key.
No, but even in rural areas, you think rural India is less aware politically thanks to WhatsApp and social media.
What seems
I
to me to
tell
be
you, the
happening,
divide,
but
political
Modi,
divide, awareness divide is.
Putin had a 90% support rating when he invaded Crimea. 90%. In India, Modi barely gets more than, and his government barely gets more than 40% of the national vote. 40% of the national vote. So, we are a very deeply divided country. And I think in the anxiety to not rock the boat, they may be doing something wrong. But really, look at all the positives. You say about Kashmir, and I'm appalled at what has been done to the Pandits, and I know quite a lot because I have friends who fled to London from there. How little was done, even for their refugee camps in Delhi, how little was done. And it's appalling that, they didn't even have proper toilets in these places. Then you cannot speak about having solidarity. But he has amended Article 370, 35A. It's a big step, long way to go. He has now ratified the right for people to buy property. This is a long which has been done.
That's one step forward, two steps backwards situation. It's not working like that. And the Delimitation Commission is playing bad politics. Jammu region is up in arms against what they're doing in order to give an advantage to Kashmir Valley and ensure that Kashmiri Muslims always have a upper hand, and they ensure that they rule the roost.
But this will be a disaster because that is exactly what the amendment was supposed to overcome. So it will be really, neutralizing the effect of the amendment. So that will be a disaster. With Jammu and Kashmir together, you change the entire voting population. So let's hope they don't do this.
They're doing it. Jammu is up in arms. You should be in touch with how deeply anguished Jammu is and things that they're saying with hard facts.
I would only add one
CPP
point.
expects him.
I would be very unhappy if this really were to become established completely, but I would only say that the basis for this anti-minority campaign of which the government is being accused of, and it really is a chorus if you read the foreign press, is going to be about Jammu and Kashmir in the first instance. So maybe they've taken fright. I don't know. Maybe they've taken fright. I think we have to play a long hand. The only place, where they, I think, did terrible things, as we all know now, I won't repeat, is in West Bengal. But then I also accept, having been a party to some of the election campaigns, we had a big online team, global team. He was not directly in control. He was not directly in control. A lot of things were done by people from the BJP who come from Delhi, come from elsewhere, and we know how badly they behave. So I don't entirely blame him because he's one person. The system as a whole can let him down. So I
No,
don't
no,
blame
no, no,
him.
no, 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 no. We are not expecting. We are not expecting Modi ji to go and do a Rambo act here, there, everywhere. But what stops him from taking a strong stand when Palgar sadhus are lynched and it's videographed what's happening to them? Totally innocent persons. Why not a statement comes out of his mouth? It's so
I have
when
wanted.
Bengali Hindus were brutalized, raped, killed, murdered, their homes burned because they came out in support of BJP. You keep mum. If anything, you do naman to that Hitler Didi. Now the point is, these are not things that people are not expecting him to go go at war with West Bengal government. But
I share your anguish, but let me try to understand why, even though I may not agree with the reason. Let me try and understand. He may have concluded, with all his experience from Gujarat elsewhere, that I won't do anything which will allow my critics to say, oh, he's a leader of the Hindus. He may have concluded that I will do nothing that will facilitate this accusation because I speak up for Hindus. That's the only expression I have. I don't agree this would be the way anybody should behave. I think that would be a mistake. But I keep coming back to the long run and the big picture, and I swallow a lot of the things. And I have nothing to do with the BJP or the Prime Minister. I have no connection with them. In fact, I am privately denounced as a anti-Hindu and anti-Indian. So I have no debts to them. That's what they say about me in private. Anti-Hindu hai, anti-India hai, anti-BJP hai. So, but
I mean, that's embarrassing. If you are not good enough for them, then nobody is. Then they deserve.
कोई
Then
बात
they
नहीं है.
deserve Tista Setalvad.
नहीं कोई बात नहीं. I mean, I'm thinking, I'm not thinking about the individual. I'm looking at the data. The one question I would like to answer, which was implicitly posed in your discussion with Sanjay, when will India be ready to be more assertive? I'll give you a very specific moment where this would be possible. Because I'm a political economist and I always look at the hard data about the economy. At the moment, India's manufacturing base is about 18%, which is quite low for a country of our size. Once we hit one third, 33 plus, a lot will change, which means that we will have a strong domestic industrial base, which will give us autonomy. Now, that includes machine tools, non-ferrous metals, all the things which empower a country to make weapons. So I will wait till the time India hits 33% or so of manufacturing share in overall GDP, jumping from 18. And then perhaps the moment has come for whichever leadership to take a more robust stand with the outside world.
Okay. Now, last question before we take on Rajiv Dhya's question. He says India should not take POK, which will bring in 50 lakh more Muslims. No, we are not saying bring those people in. We are just talking about reclaiming a lost part of, sacred part of our geography. What would you say to that, Rajiv Dhya's comment?
There is some truth in the possibility that this will be the outcome, but I would say, if you look at just the politics of UP and Bihar and elsewhere, a lot of the truculence of the Muslim electorate stems from the fact that Pakistan is there. If you cut down Pakistan to West Punjab, people will begin to see the world different. Then they will know we are here, we're not going anywhere, and we must start thinking a bit differently about our position in society. Nobody's threatening us, nobody's trying to erase us. But we have to deal first with the problem of Pakistan by multiplicity of measures, which is happening. Because Pakistan really is just West Punjab. Nobody else is a happy member of that country. Whether it's the Sindh, Karachi even. And this is on the way because, this was an artificial entity created for geopolitical reasons, and it became a military cantonment for the West. It only became a military cantonment. Now it's a military cantonment for the Chinese. It has no other purpose but to harass India. So once we reduce that to where it belongs, restore our direct land connectivity via Gilgit into Afghanistan and Central Asia, the problems will subside, and all of the people in India then will start thinking, we have a stake in this country, and we will build it. And honestly, India is not a place where any minority will be targeted. There may be riots, maybe injustice, but there is no grand scheme to erase 220 million. This is an accusation which is being made in the British and American media, and even in Israel, in the Haaretz, such accusations are being made. We have to live with this. We wait till we are a bit stronger. I noticed, because I've been living in London for such a long time, for the first time here,
all these assurances are not going to convince the Muslims or pacify them, not the good Muslims. Their agenda is Ghazwa Hind. Okay, they're not happy with just coexistence. That's not their agenda. So I don't know why we are offering these certificates. Nobody is going to attack you. Nobody is going to dislike you. No, but they don't care. They don't care if we love them. They don't care if we touch their feet and we pave their roads with gold. Their mission is to turn India into another Pakistan, to a complete mission Ghazwa Hind, so that they can go and face Allah and get their 70. Now, let's not therefore go on and on.
I have to disagree.
No. Let me listen. Listen to me. I'm saying people like me who swallowed Gandhian wisdom, lock, stock, and barrel on these issues for decades. Today, I and millions like me are saying we don't wish to live in the shadow of Islam. It threatens our very being. I don't want to live in the shadow of Christianity or Islam because their agenda is to decimate me. Why should I accept that? Why should I be offering good character certificates? That we are good people. I'm tired of being good. I'm tired of being hated. I'm tired of being told that you deserve to be decimated. Your civilization deserves to be decimated. And yet, we are good people. Hindus will never do that. And Modi ji will of course, we've never done that. But now we are tired. We're tired of that. And I am truly today afraid to live under the shadow of Islam or the domination of Christianity. I cannot breathe.
I understand where you're coming from, and I'm from Bengal, so I understand it very well. You are from a region where you also have been exposed to it. But let me give you a different take. It's an intellectual exercise. First of all, I don't think any community has ever been outside history and therefore completely unchanging. That's the first point, outside history. Secondly, there have been very many secular reformist movements in the Arab world. They were systematically thwarted by the Anglo-Americans and the French, who wanted conservative people to thwart Arab unity and nationalism. So there were reform movements. Even now, there are signs. These people are not deeply committed to Islam. Many people are leaving it. And the other thing is, if you look at that very important book written in the mid-60s by Ira Lapidus, one of the great scholars of Islam, it's about Muslim cities in the later Middle Ages, one of the most important books ever written on the community. He says something which is quite relevant even to the Indian situation. He says that, Muslim rulers have always lived and survived by mobilizing the mob. It is always mob rule, mobilized by leadership. So in the Indian context, I would say, if there is reform in the Arab world, that is a key backdrop. And then what happens, you see, It is a leadership which constantly mobilizes, and the mosques and the madrasas which socializes. These are two critical issues which have to be tackled. They have to be tackled. Because you cannot say that these 200 million people are going to go away somewhere else. We have to make do with. They are not going to go away. They are not going somewhere else. They are going to be with us. And I think the reform of this is possible. And the West is now retreating somewhat. No, they are the people who really. I mean, look at what the Saudi Mohammed bin Salman has been saying. He said we were instructed by the Americans to spread Wahhabi culture around the world. That's why we did it. See who has been pulling the strings, sitting in Washington.
Gautam, no doubt America's played foul, and it has established Wahhabi Islam and made politics noxious, global politics noxious, and they're paying the price. But that's not the point. Islam has a history of its own. No matter when they entered India as invaders, they didn't just loot. The brutality with which they slaughtered, they didn't just loot temples, they destroyed them, they humiliated, they made sex slaves out of lakhs and millions. They haven't given up on that agenda. Unless they give up on that agenda and don't talk about reform, oh, we will have uniform civil code. No, thank you. That agenda has to go. And maybe Saudi Arabia will lead. I hope they do. I gladly go and live in Saudi Arabia if they turn their Islam or defang Islam, so to speak. Because here, the manner in which today the Islamists are threatening to not only break up India, but slaughter people. Every day there are killings and brutal killings. And there is fear about having them surround you all around the place. The mini Pakistans are creating fear in every city, in every own place.
All I can say, hearing what you are arguing, and I don't disagree with that. Again, I say I'm from Bengal, so I'm extremely familiar with this. I cannot agree that community is outside history and therefore unchanging. Then the question arises, under what circumstances can they change? And I've outlined one or two reasons why this is possible. Fully accepting what you're saying. But the incitement of the leadership is a very critical factor in India, very critical factor, because that's how they vote. That's how. Sure, many of them share the views of the leaders, but I think the leadership is a critical issue. The mosque and the madrasa. And if you look at some of the people you yourself have interviewed on Manushi, the women, how they were brutally socialized, how they were filled with hatred, intemperate hatred. This is therefore a product of socialization. So we have to consider the circumstances, because we are going to be living with each other, whether we like it or not. We are going to be living with each other. So we have to consider the circumstances. And I've just said, a change in the Arab world, which was stopped by outsiders, the defanging of the leadership, which is taking place somewhat in Assam. Madrasas are being turned into proper places of education. Big step forward. Big step forward. And I also think the great Achilles heel of Islam is the role of women, which is why they're obsessed about keeping them down. They are obsessed with their sexual conduct, their hijab, and punish them ruthlessly. Just the other day, last week, they've stoned to a woman and a man to death in Afghanistan. Just last week. Women are the Achilles heel, and they know that. So if we can help the women to assert themselves as full human beings, don't say become Hindu. You see, becoming Hindu is a non-issue. You just have to have conduct which is appropriate to the country you live in. I think these things, you may say I'm dreaming. I suspend my judgment on that, but I think this is the only way forward, because we cannot see it go away.
See what used to be the way forward. Now, quickly, Admin bring all the comments that have come through Super Chat. And if Dr. Sen wants to say something, one or two we've already taken. Quickly do that and we wind up. Ashish, please. Can you bring one after the other, as many as you can see? I think there are about 6 of them at the most. Yes. US and Soviet Union did the same things to the Cold War. Nobody was more moral than the other. What do you say to that?
Well, the Soviet Union occupied territory right up to Berlin because of the attack which came from the West. And the war plans of the German army was to kill as many people as possible and enslave the rest. This is no longer a mystery. Everything has been published, and I have a huge library at home on this. And they were doing it systematically. They managed to murder 30, 40 million people. And this actually was not a new plan. People think this was just Hitler. These issues were raised in the 19th century by German professors. There was a great discussion as to how Slavs were not fully human. This was also an issue for the Kaiser before the First World War. Hitler simply carried the torch and he took it much further. So this is an old history of how to replace the Slavs in the lands to which they belong. So their occupation of Eastern Europe was a product of this war that they will not let happen again. And then, as we know, Gorbachev withdrew and said, okay, we are not playing this game anymore. And then the Americans did what they feared, bring the war to your border. So now Putin has responded. See, my feeling about Ukraine was at the very beginning, Gorbachev should have said, we will federate Ukraine into the USSR with virtual complete autonomy, but you will remain federated with us. And only your foreign policy and armed forces will be controlled. Everything else will be up to you.
Okay.
This is what should have done.
Ashish, please bring the other comment before we take on Bhartantra. The one you had a minute ago, let Gautam Da answer that. And then, okay. Experts say kinetic old school is now over. New age warfare will be non kinetic. Propaganda, cyber, economic, etc. Is that a lie to weaken former colonies? Because we see a kinetic war powered by new tech. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
No, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And in fact, we had, I think, a discussion with you and Rajiv Malhotra on this. Absolutely correct that there are other alternative forms of warfare. And you see, a very grave danger is arising for India because China is a leader in the world now in artificial intelligence. If you combine artificial intelligence with quantum computing, the nature of warfare will be transformed. It will be a game changer. Now, I'm relieved to find that the Indian Army has set up an institution now to do research on artificial intelligence and quantum computing, amongst other things. I think we have the intellectual skills to proceed, but China is way ahead because of the way they use their surveillance cameras to collect data. They're way ahead of everybody because of that. They've collected a huge amount of data. We can catch up. We are about 15 years behind, I would think. The Americans are about a decade behind China. We need to catch up. And the Indian side has woken up to this a bit late, as always, but we are doing it. And that will be the nature of the warfare. It'll be in
We have
space.
dysfunctional schools. Our native intelligence is being destroyed. Our kids are growing up to be intellectually retarded, unemployable, lumpenized creatures, deracinated. If they don't fix the education system, which is what nurtures your education intelligence, how are you going to get artificial intelligence and that whole world? How do you even enter it anyway?
Madhuji,
Another question:
you and
post
I
eight
both agree
years.
that the big failure is not to deal with education in India. This is a very big failure. I have to agree with you completely.
And if you don't do that, sir, you
So,
don't get good healthcare, you don't get good engineers, you don't get good lawyers, you don't get good cops, you don't get good
nothing.
bureaucrats. I mean, the way they are recruiting bureaucrats who go spend 8 years, 6 years appearing for UPSC again and again by mugging guidebooks and taking these tutorial classes. I mean, it's neurotic people who are ending up, in the bureaucracy. How are they going to be game changers? When anyway,
Bilkul,
post
bilkul.
8 years, if you can't change system, then well, I'm going to get LK intelligence. मुझे गालियां पड़ेंगी. आप मोदी जी को बहुत क्रिटिसाइज करते हैं. उनका भक्त बोल रहा था मुझे. अम, दुख है. ये तो गौतम दा भी माने हैं कि ये बहुत बड़ा फेलियर है कि एजुकेशन सिस्टम इतना जर्जर हो चुका है. इतना जर्जर हो चुका है. But you know what I draw hope from? That you don't need to attend classes anymore. You can have the world of internet has opened the possibility of even poor people getting decent classes through the net. And we don't, maybe I would not send my child to a sarkari curriculum school that includes them going to, you see, even if you're sending them to St. Columba's or Xavier's, the curriculum is noxious.
I agree with you. It is not such a big deal. And in fact, I have worked out plans since I spent all my life in education of how to alter this. It will take 3 years in schools. It will take 7 to 10 years at higher education. It can be done. You've got to make a start. And it is not going to be very costly either because we can use, as you have just pointed out, the internet. There are many ways of altering, particularly higher education, which looks complex, but I actually have put a proposal to my friends. It's being examined, and I will put this to appropriate people. But I'm afraid nobody is listening to the likes of me.
Nobody's
So,
listening to anybody. Anyway, next question. Next question addressed to Gautam Da. Ashish, admin ji, bring the next if there's any. All right. Yeah, Bhartantra. I think China's dealing with Islam problem very well. France too, with actual secularism. Shouldn't we learn from them instead of criticizing China? Gautam Da.
well, let me give you a very brutal response. They want to replace Islamofascism with communist fascism. This I don't approve. They want to turn them into little communist robots. This I don't approve. And I also don't accept that it is okay for uh, Chinese Communist Party's officials to come and occupy your wife's bed under any circumstance. This is not acceptable. As a Hindu, I cannot, under any circumstance, accept. This is what they're doing. They're occupying the beds of wives of people who have been sent to camps. Ye sab nahi chalega. We cannot, under any circumstances, because this is not our Sanskrit. And that is what they're doing. To force people not to speak the language, I'm opposed to that. Reform of Islamic education, yes. But this is not the way to do it. So I will not approve of the Communist Party, which is a nasty, murderous party.
Which is the way to do it?
As I've said, there must be an element of cooperation, and there must be contextual changes which force this cooperation. Contextual changes in the Arab world, in the leadership, and some firm action definitely must be taken. We have to take firm action. Why in Kashmir do you think people behave so badly? Because that is what every single mosque was saying, this is what you must do. And then mobilize the ordinary people. This is what we must do to stop. Let me see let's wait for the Assam example to unfold. This will be a great example. See, and he has explained everything beautifully, the chief minister. And this is the courage I would like to see a little bit more of in the rest of BJP ruled states.
Any other questions, Ashish? Please bring them and then we wind up. Okay, we're through with the earlier ones we'd already taken. So, viewers, please do like, subscribe, and share. And those of you who think that I or Manushi is proposing bringing down this regime and replacing it with some other, please don't go that route. We're not into BJP bashing, we're not into Modi bashing. Whatever I say that's critical is out of concern that they could actually lose power if they continue to make certain kinds of mistakes. Bengal mishandling is one example, and there are a few others as well. So it is the criticism of a well-wisher. It's not the criticism of a malicious opponent. Please understand that. और वो कबीर का है ना, निंदक नियरे राखिए तो बिना साबुन के भी आपको धो देते हैं. तो हर सिटीजन को अपने नेताओं को ऑनेस्ट फीडबैक देना जरूरी होता है और डेमोक्रेसी नहीं तो नहीं चल सकती. ब्लाइंड सपोर्ट से, ब्लाइंड भक्ति से नहीं चल सकती. गौतम दा, would you agree with that?
I agree. And the only thing I would say to people, even in England, I say to Indians, please go out and vote. If you are so critical, please at least go out and vote once every 4.5, 5 years. Go out and vote because our vote share is very low. This is could be a problem in UP right now. Low turnout.
True. That's true. And if you had such an active chief minister like Yogi, if he doesn't inspire people to vote in big numbers, then this democracy is not worth having. if he has to beg for votes, if he has to say, I will now also give you this free and that freebie, it's really disgusting. Because
Then let
I
me say
can't think
one
of
quick
any
thing
chief
about
minister who.
voting. Let me say one quick thing about voting. I agree with what you just said, but let me add one quick thing. I have been a long time advocate of investing serious money into making voting much easier. There are ways of technical ways, and there are more booths, more people. It'll cost money, but raise the vote share to 80%. That is what you need to do.
Yes, true, I agree, but then after that, give citizens a voice. We cast a vote and then you feel so helpless before every agency of the government. You feel like a hapless crawling supplicant, and that's not the way to inspire people to become committed loyal citizens of a country. Now, luckily in India, the sense of rashtravad is much deeper than being loyal to the government. That really is our saving grace. हम देश के लिए मर मिटने को भी तैयार हो जाते हैं, परंतु सरकारों की गुलामी नहीं करना चाहते, चाहे वो कोई भी सरकार हो, उसकी गुलामी नहीं करना चाहते. जो भी देश के लिए अच्छा करे उसको सलाम. But I think citizens need a measure of participatory governance. We don't have it. And a democracy without a sense of participation for citizens is no democracy. With these words, friends, I urge you to like, subscribe, and share. And please also support the channel. You have the address and how to go about sending your contributions to Manushi channel. Please do help Manushi grow and spread wide. Thank you for staying with us for more than 1 hour 45 minutes. Dhanyavad, Shubh Ratri, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.